Welcome back to Running the Show, a podcast exploring the intersection of running and business. If you followed along this far during season 2, you've joined us on this journey through this impending Netflix series coming out this summer in 2024. We've gone through chapter 1, we go over the facts that we know right now. Chapter 2, the goals of a docuseries, like academically and then also in practice. Chapter 3, the narrative arcs that can be employed in docuseries to kind of capture our hearts and our minds. And now, Chapter 4, this is going to be looking forward, right? None of these episodes have aired yet, so we don't have analysis of how things are playing out, but let's look forward. The reason why I want to do that is because Season 2 has been confirmed. World Athletics made a statement saying that there will be a Season 2 of this track and field docuseries, mainly because the viewers, the fans, the folks who might be listening right now were so excited about what could be. The reception was great and they want to do another season, so this is great. Now, let's do this. So we'll get into it by comparing the possible angles of what a Season 2 could look like based on how these other box-to-box productions have approached to Season 2 and how closely this can mirror it. And I also want to look into some other series formats for sports docuseries that are currently out there and kind of assess them and see, is there any way that we would see track and field enter those spaces? So it's a little bit more of a departure, right? It's outside of the realm of what this docuseries with box to box could be, but just to kind of indulge a little bit in these other formats to see, hey, is there other things that can go down in the future? So let's get right into it. I'm going to scroll back up on my notes as we go through it. So let's look at a Season 2. The one that feels the most ripe for discussion here is F1. The reason why, I know that we did identify that F1 isn't the best mapping scenario for, what kind of conflicts and what kind of nuances exist in the sport. But with that being the series that has been renewed for several seasons, we have a little bit more to go off of, a little bit more we can understand and how the development from Season 1 to Season 2 played out. Now, with Breakpoint, which recently released their Season 2 in early 2024, and Full Swing releasing their second season in the coming weeks or months, we will have additional data points, but let's look at the F1 model here about these similarities and differences from Season 1 to Season 2. Jumping right in to these similarities, let's look at those conflict arcs, those narrative scenarios that we want to look at. The driver versus driver conflict series from Season 1 to Season 2 was similar, right? We saw them kind of lean back into that setting and say, we still have this old generation versus new generation of drivers that are all fighting for the same, fighting for the same title. They have fighting for limited spots is another thing that we see again. There's a day-to-day race competition. There's final standings. All of that is a similar through line that we could see from Season 1 to Season 2. Now, as we get into like driver versus team, there's some similarities as well with contract negotiations, driver swaps within teams, driver versus team principles. All of those things kind of come back into play. Those seem like pretty constant from year to year and a constant feature as a result of how they talk about it. And team versus team also, there's some similarities in that too. We have rivalry in position, rivalry in car similarity in terms of the build. And then we also have these rivalry in obtaining the same driver, right? Contract negotiations are up and who's fighting for the attention for the newest, best legacy driver even. And also the funding versus results, right? That doesn't go away either. There's always this constant of, is the investment that's being made worth it in that regard, which is pretty interesting. Now, the main difference here, right, is that there were no orientation or education episodes, right? The Season 1 started off and laid the groundwork and the framework for what a season of F1 looks like, right? They're inviting you into their sport. Through that season as well, they also introduced some nuances about, let's say they're going into a new market, right? Introducing the concept of how they're adding races to the series. They really do that much narrative work in building that out the second time. Now, there were some criticisms, right, that we called out before. Going into a second season here, there were criticisms about the fabrication of narrative by Box to Box and the way they frame things together, in the F1 side of things, right? That certain conflicts maybe were hyped up a little bit bigger than they needed to be, going from season to season, kind of creating the drama as opposed to what actually played out on a week-to-week basis. And we saw that, and we mentioned it before, that folks like Max Verstappen took a step away from the series in terms of being a focal point because he didn't really like the way he was being conveyed and portrayed to the public. So those criticisms, I think, can be counterbalanced to like what needs to happen for the viewer to be pulled in. Now, let's talk about how track and field could be similar and different to this. Now, going into a second season, right, the amount of avenues open to box in a second season for track and field seems pretty interesting because, right, this comes back to the differences of F1 and track and field. F1 has 2 drivers per team on the grid. There are driver swaps that can happen for sure, but the teams aren't changing mid-season, and largely there's 1 to 2 teams that get rebranded or renamed from season to season. So it's not the biggest shuffling of the deck from, year to year or season of Drive to Survive to season of Drive to Survive. Track and field has such a vast network. Let's even talk about 100 and 200 sprinters. The focal point of this first series, there are so many people outside the scope of who they are probably going to look into in this first season, right? So let's think of just an example here. If Fred Curley is left out of this first season, or if Sha'Carri Richardson is left out in this first season, if Abby Steiner is left out of this first season, that's somebody they can look at in season 2. It could be somebody who's a young gun who's coming up, or maybe somebody who just didn't sign the paperwork the first time. It could be Arian Knighton. He's one of the best folks that we can see in 200s, but if he was not interested in being a part of this first iteration, you might see somebody like him come into the mix, which is interesting. Now, outside of like the roster within the disciplines they featured, with those can change, like we just said. There are so many events that they could focus on, right? There's the ability to focus on 400s and 800s, or 800s in the mile, 5K, 10K, field events, like the ability for them to invest in long jump and triple jump, high jump, pole vault, shot put, right? If they want to go in that direction and focus on skilled events, that is a completely different play. It's getting brand new people that we will likely not see in this first season. And there's an opportunity for education to happen again, right? If there were discipline-based seasons, if you will, right, they can talk about block starts and the 100 and the 200 and the skill and the focus needed to be successful in that space. But they also have the ability to say, all right, now we're going to focus on throws. And these are all of these technical elements that, in addition to being strong, in addition to being fast, in addition to being durable, and the mindset that goes into competition, these are the skills that are being honed on a daily basis in training. So that is another direction this whole thing can pivot in season 2. So we don't really know what the scope of what this is. So I'm excited to see what developments can take place because it is really vast. And if we want to kind of indulge this conversation of what the benefit of staying with this roster of 100 and 200 meter runners is, you have the ability to deepen the relationship with these personalities we know, right? Looking back at F1, we fall deeper in love with Pierre Gasly. We fall deeper in love with Daniel Ricciardo from season to season because we see them, we see their ups and downs, and we know that year over year things change, injuries happen, things outside of their control can come into place, and also these redemption arcs that could take place. Somebody has a terrible season, they have the ability to turn it around, and then they're the belle of the ball the following year, and everybody wants them. They have that ability to, to kind of build those same things or just see them play out if they focus on that same roster from season 1 to season 2 in track and field. So that is, a potential benefit. But, right, this is to be also tempered with that discussion we were having about F1, where in the event that things aren't as interesting naturally that they want, you have the opportunity for things to feel stale, right? It could feel like these are athletes who are super talented at what they do, but they might not really turn heads when the viewers are watching the screen. Now, the tough thing about this, right, or conceivably the tough thing about this, is they're going to start filming this next season before the first season may come out, or there's going to be overlap. So the ability to make large pivots isn't necessarily at their an advantage they could play out. So it is interesting for sure. Now let's talk about, right, if they did focus on a different discipline, regardless of what that discipline is, if it's middle distance, if it's long distance, if it's field events, you have the ability to introduce new folks that capture the hearts and minds of the viewers, right? You have new people that you can develop from day one and have people be interested in outcomes. And that is super exciting. But it also presents the same kind of gamble that season 1 of 100-meter and 200-meter sprinters is, built around. You have to hope that you pick the right people to do well that season, to have these arcs, or, people who are in the public eye who, garner the attention and headlines and drama that you want as a producer to get the views. So there's a lot for them to balance. I have no idea what's going through their head, but it seems like a very interesting choice in order for this to be potentially successful. Because even though season 2 is confirmed, if we get into the episode to episode of season 1, and it's a similar thing to Breakpoint, where there was not the reception they expected for viewership on the Netflix platform for that, it would take either a fair amount of money or some kind of handshake deal or something to get a third season out of this, right? So each season has the potential to make or break the longevity and the long-term success of what this is supposed to do. So I am quite interested to see how this is going to play out. But without getting too far down the rabbit hole in that regard, right? Let's have some fun. Let's think about some other series or sports docuseries that exist right now, and kind of talk about what they do well from a theme perspective. And then let's see if something in track and field could be told similarly in that format. I think that would be very interesting for us to think about in that regard. So one that should come to mind here for folks who maybe got on the docuseries train during the pandemic in that 2020, 2021 era was The Last Dance, right? This is the ESPN docuseries produced on the last dance of the Chicago Bulls and their run for the NBA championship, right? It goes through this lens of the final season. The production team does a great job at flashing back to the historic career of Michael Jordan and him joining the Chicago Bulls. And it relies really heavily on this archival footage, not only in game, but archival footage of Jordan playing, flipping a coin and making bets in the locker room. It's him locking Jerry Krause out of the locker room after a win. It's archival footage of Dennis Rodman playing at his first and Dennis Rodman playing for the Pistons and Scottie Pippen playing college ball in a program that didn't necessarily match up with what Jordan did. So very cool that they were able to pull in all of that stuff that really helped build this universe of how all of those athletes ended up in this space at this time. So you feel like you're brought along, even though they keep doing this flashback, flash forward, which is super challenging. They do it well because they have visual references that accompany all of the storylines they want. You have these star-studded interviews from players, coaches, executives that also illustrate this story. It was one of the best things I know that brought people into this, into the universe of the Bulls, into the NBA, and so on, into the Jordan universe as well. Now, some of the themes that they played out here was like athlete versus team and organization, right? They laid this out pretty early that the players were kind of pitted against Jerry Krause. He was in the ownership team that really dictated the who was going to be in this program for this final year. The coach of the team that he's not allowed to come back after this season, or he's going to break up the team and sell players off because the team is kind of bloated. They've done too much and the value exceeds the risk exceeds the value. You also had this Dennis Rodman versus the team thing where this kind of, I think the coach calls him a Bronco, right? You don't put a saddle on a Bronco. He's this guy who doesn't really follow the rules on and off the court, and that was an element there. You have this coach versus team, right? This is the same reference with, being against Jerry Krause, who was going to blow things up after the season. So you have Phil's final season, and that's the guy who coined this term, The Last Dance, which lends itself to the title. You have team versus team. They lay out these rivalries like, the Bulls versus the Pistons, the Bulls versus the Jazz, the Bulls versus the Celtics, right? All of these things were super interesting to see over the years and how it played out. And then you get this athlete versus self element as well. This is like Jordan's response to his father's death and his debut in baseball, and all of these moments where he comes through injury. There's the infamous flu game, and it's all of these moments of introspection for him. Obviously, years later, reflecting back on his mindset and what he brought to the game, or even through eras of the career, which is super cool. Now, let's look at if this is something that could be told similarly in track and field. And the unfortunate thing, despite that being so beautiful in the way it was done, is it does seem like unlikely at this time because the narrative arcs that are needed and the footage that's needed is just too far from what exists, right? Like, you don't really have dynasties in track and field at this time from a team perspective, right? You have folks you have individuals that you could look at. You have Eliud Kipchoge, you have Allison Felix, Usain Bolt, Courtney DeWalter on the ultra side. But from the dynasty side of things, although these names carry a lot of weight, I don't know if they have the kind of this universal juice that the Bulls had or Michael Jordan had, and the footage to back it up as well, right? So it's just unfortunate that that fervor doesn't exist to power a docuseries of this way that can, bring people back nostalgically. And I have no idea who is potentially capturing the footage required to do anything on the scale that The Last Dance achieved. This is archival footage from the 80s and the 90s and into the 2000s. And that level of footage to be captured and archived without being released prior is uncanny. So this is truly a one of one. It's a unicorn. And unfortunately, something to move on from, Now, another one that should be obvious to folks who are Netflix fans here is Last Chance U, right? It's a Netflix docuseries produced on junior college football programs. There's also some on basketball as well. And the name stems from this concept of junior college programs being these athletes' last chance at a successful athletic career and sometimes an academic career as well. And this idea that they can progress to a top college program and ultimately at professional level. Now, the series follows key players, coaches, and staff and delves into their backgrounds, their trials, their tribulations of the athletes. How did they get here? They might have, been at a big program and something happened, and that's why they're at a junior college program where they can get playing time. Maybe it's something that this is this athlete's first shot at a college education and a college program. So it's kind of this convergence of, almost like a tale of two cities, right? Who's coming down, who's coming up, and then who ultimately succeeds, right? Who rises to the top through season to season that this is. Now, let's think about, could this be told from a track and field perspective. Now, this does feel a little unlikely again, but more so from the scope of like institutional differences, right? Last Chance U prevails in its like juxtaposition of these junior college programs and D1 programs, right? There's this promised land of a D1 program, and what may come later is somewhat like universally known and accepted and anticipated, and what's on like the light at the end of the tunnel for the accomplishment, right? Like if they play well enough at a junior college that they might go to a better life at a, and more resources, more money, and more like a better education at a large program, right? Going from a program in like a junior college program in East LA and then going to USC, right? There's an assumption of what comes with that. And also the next leap that you can take intellectually in these sports of basketball and football is that program conceivably has a better opportunity of getting you to the league, right? Getting you to a professional career. It just rides on the implications alone. Now, this doesn't necessarily exist when we think of like a running context, right? There's standout junior college athletes who even reach the Olympic level, but there's not this perceived promised land of D1 track and field per se, and even more so to professional track and field as well, right? It doesn't seem like it's as logical of a leap for, let's say, the average viewer to say, oh, if they do well at East LA, then they're going to go to USC, and then if they run well enough at USC, they're either going to make the Olympics and or get a professional contract. And even then, I don't know if folks have a strong conception of what professional contracts in track and field look like and how good they are or bad they are. And it just reminds me of, if you've listened to previous episodes with our other hosts here, Evan and Emma and Evan, they're both very, very adamant that there needs to be salary transparency for something like track and field, because we don't know how well people are getting paid and how poorly people are getting paid. Whereas we know what LeBron signs for in the NBA. So, right, returning to that basketball example, if you play well enough at East LA and you go to USC, you might get drafted by the Lakers. And then at the Lakers, like, you have this idea that there's a minimum salary in the league, and then there's sponsorship deals on top of it, right? So it's a difficult system for it to be completely transferable, unfortunately. Now, another one that's kind of captured hearts and minds recently is Welcome to Wrexham, right? This is a Hulu docuseries. It's produced on the Wrexham Football Club in Wales, and it covers the team and the town of Wrexham through its purchase and investment by Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds. So Rob and Ryan, they document the purchase of their club, or the purchase of this club and their investment as the team tries to reach promotion into a new league. Now, they profile the players, the coaches, the staff, the town, the residents, the supporters, all of this stuff. So it's definitely like a bigger than the team docuseries, which is cool. It has a lot of like educational components that they play very well through the scope of kind of playing the game that Rob and Ryan have no idea what goes on in European football or soccer, right? That they don't understand the rules or the promotional structure or like the funds or the funding and development of players. Like, they don't get it. So there's a lot of educational components, like they're learning with you as a viewer, which I think is a really clever way to bring you into it, let's say as an American viewer, and as a result, making you a fan of A, the sport, and B, this team. So a super clever way for them to build this out. There's, more than one season, and they're doing great. Now, could something like this exist in track and field? And I think, for the first time, we could say perhaps, this concept of like an outsider with status or celebrity learning about the sport as they like sponsor a league or a team or an athlete would be kind of interesting, right? Like, if there's a almost like a benefactor who comes in. Obviously, it depends on who comes in. Like if Jeff Bezos comes in and does this, I think people would think very differently than if somebody who is like universally likable to some extent came in and made this kind of same sizable investment and was like, I don't know what's going on, but I like it. That seems very interesting. Now, where this may lack in some similarity is Wrexham makes this a bigger than the team proposition, right? Like this is them almost rehabilitating a team in order to rehabilitate a town. They're bringing industry back through like not only the pride of rebuilding this program to what it was, but also kind of building the industry back as well, right? They're pouring dollars into this to bring tourism dollars in, to bring commerce back, to support locals in what they do. And they tell that story really well through the residents and just the general historical aspect of it. I don't know if that kind of scope could be brought to a track and field program or to an athlete or to a league. Like unless there was unless they were kind of building something in an area that needed to or could use investment and rehabilitation from like a financial aspect, that could be interesting, but it does lack still kind of the historical aspect of this program was once a top tier or premier offering and now it's not, and we're going to bring it back. I don't know if that exists in a track and field context. So it is, with a grain of salt, this could be a potential format that would be interesting to see in track and field. Now, another one from Netflix that kind of came out around the same time as Last Chance U is Cheer. Now, this is a Netflix docuseries produced on the Navarro cheer program through a season and has since come back and featured other programs. This is like the same kind of junior college angle here. It's a top tier program. It's profiled through athletes. It's profiled through coaches and staff, and it culminates to their like national performance, right? They do all these things for this one huge moment that they've been waiting for. And similarly to, let's say, Welcome to Wrexham, you had this outsider perspective where it does a fair amount of education of showing you, what goes into competitive cheer, which is very interesting. I mean, this could be a similar thing for track and field if you were to look at it in the scope of like understanding maybe some of the more like skill level sports and doing some education there. Now, unlike Last Chance U, cheer doesn't really ride on this idea of, if you do well here, you'll get into a great program. While that is a path for some to go to a D1 program and to move on into that space or kind of cheer competitively beyond it, they don't have the crutch of this is exactly what will happen for you, or there's no assumption you could rely on because I don't know what cheer scholarships look like. And they don't touch on that. I don't know what a cheerleader salary is in the NFL or the NBA or the NHL. Right? I don't know that. And so they don't really rely on the crutch or that kind of familiarity that Last Chance U, has afforded to it. Now, could this docuseries of this cheer program, could it be similar or could it be like produced in a similar way for track and field? And I do think similarly to Wrexham, this is a perhaps for me. This is, this show rides on a dynasty program in a niche sport, which, I'm sure everyone's ears are ringing when I say niche sport here, just in terms of like the general public. Now, it takes juxtaposed position of like showing viewers like the raw talent and athleticism with these strong personalities in the team and the coaching staff. It shows off, right, these impossibly complex feats of athleticism, the flips, the turns, the tumbling. I mean, there's a ton of injuries as well that they have to I don't have to, but they do highlight to show like this is a high-flying sport with a lot of risk associated with it. And the personalities are really strong. Who likes who doesn't. It kind of feels a little reality show-y, but it still is invested in like the scope of competition and the athleticism with it. Now, this seems relatively achievable for a track and field offshoot of this. But there needs to be an undeniable program that wins so often, because like think of this Navarro program. They immediately like legitimize this docuseries by telling you right away, this program has won this many titles. Like everyone's gunning for them. People go from out of state to this junior college program because it's so good and all of this stuff, right? So they build this universe of, this is the place to be if you want to be in this sport and you want to be successful. And they just need to find an undeniable program in track and field that can also bolster the same results, whatever that may be, right? Also, the personalities have to be big on that team itself. Now, with the cheer series, right, there's a lot of like interpersonal conflict that goes on like off the mat, but there's also conflict that's on the mat. Who's going to be selected for the performances, right? Now, the only critique of the show that I have here in this, similarity to track and field here, or how feasible it is how they relied heavily on these personalities, and to the extent that interpersonal drama led several episodes. Now, this was like, who's in an active fight with, the person they have to like hold on the pyramid above them, or who hates the coach or something. And I'm not sure if it really helps the aim of the show if they're trying to like bring people into the sport. So that's kind of returning back to this thought of things are skewing a little bit more reality show with this one. And that's kind of an uncomfortable place to be, all things considered, if this is truly about sports. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. Now, on this same kind of development front, QB1 is another Netflix docuseries that comes to mind for me. It's a Netflix docuseries produced on the top quarterback recruits at the high school level and how they operate in their senior year of high school and they approach their first year of college. And you just like think of it as like the prequel to their college career. So let's jump into this like similarity with track and field. Could it be told similarly? This is another perhaps for me. Right, the show focuses on standout high school athletes and how they navigate their senior year before college. Now, they show athletes from different geographies, different demographics to show these various paths to D1, right? You have somebody who is in Louisiana with like a moderately funded program on like kind of a dirt field. It's not well taken care of, but like this person's so athletic that they are, and they're not in a huge league, they're not, in a flashy program, but they are so raw talent good that people want that person. And that person's going to go to a D1 program likely. And then it's juxtaposed in the same episode with somebody who goes to like Bishop Gorman, which is a school in Nevada that is like the high school football complex, looks like a college program. There's so much money. This is a factory for turning out like D1 recruits. So there's this like, tale of two cities, but they're all potentially going to the same place, vying for the same spot. And also, right, this kind of returns to the same thoughts around Last Chance U, that these quarterbacks in high school are going to be so successful, they're going to go to the NCAA and a major program that's D1, and then they're going to definitely go to the NFL is kind of this like thought of the momentum behind these athletes. So where this feels difficult to replicate in running is like general knowledge of what football programs are the best around, and like people have some semblance of the skill required to be a great quarterback. So when you see people doing drills for, in a football context as a quarterback, you see like the way they drop back, the way they sit in the pocket, the way they, lead the passer or kind of drop one over the top. As a viewer in a practice setting, no pads on, not a game scenario, you have this concept of like how good this person is innately, because we're more familiar with, the nuances of football potentially than we are of track and field, right? Like a reductive opinion of running's framing is that like an individual in this sport, an athlete, is mostly like rides on simply being faster than the person next to them, right? It's times more so than like how they lead a team. It's, times more so than how a certain aspect of their game is, right? Somebody might be more of a rushing quarterback, more of a passing quarterback, and they could be a dual threat. But let's say like Matt Bowling, right? This is a high school sprinter who was like huge on YouTube. People were posting a ton of videos about him. Social media was going off about this guy before he went to college. Like, people aren't necessarily excited about that guy because of like how he gets out of the blocks per se. He just like runs faster than other people, and that's what made him interesting. So I think the depth in which they may be able to explore the athleticism of these athletes in a program similar to QB1, these top recruit programs, might be a little one-dimensional, and that would just be a challenge they have to solve for in the way they put this together. Now, let's talk about Hard Knocks, right? We've been doing a lot of football things, but Hard Knocks is another one that's like a legacy program, right? This is an HBO and NFL docuseries focusing on a specific NFL team in season and covering key players through the scope of the games played. It provides a window for viewers to see this practice footage, this game planning at home, and those kinds of things that they don't necessarily see if they just tune into games regularly through the week. Now, even if you're a super fan, you don't necessarily have that access to it. I guess maybe like there's YouTube or TikTok or IG content that you could engage with, but this is a more packaged way for you to understand like how the Dolphins are doing week to week and the way they're preparing for the next thing. So it's worth noting, right, that these episodes are released practically in real time to take advantage of viewership and maintain a tether to the present. Now, what I mean there is like there could be a game on Thursday, and there is going to be a new episode of Hard Knocks that refers to that Thursday game and the week leading into it. That episode will come out on Tuesday. Like, their ability to turn around this footage so quickly in real time to almost be like a prologue on the game that was just played and what went into it is mind-blowing. Think about all of these other docuseries that I've just mentioned. None of them have that immediacy factor that Hard Knocks executes season over season. So like that kind of makes this a unicorn. But let's get into like if this could be told in track and field similarly. And again, right, based on this, I think it's unlikely. Is due to the schedule, the structural advantages, the depth of footage, the availability of footage makes Hard Knocks a unicorn. And unlikely to be replicated in other sports, especially in track and field, right? Like Hard Knocks excels in its ability, with the help from the NFL itself, to pull the curtain back with like unfettered access to 52-man teams, multiple storylines, known entities, weekly competition, and this docuseries is produced days after the competition ends, which is absurdly impressive. So running lacks the star power. Plain and simple, right? We have, Noah Lyles and Sha'Carri Richardson. Like they're the two stars of the sport right now. As like media is getting behind them, and how like even NBC and Peacock are putting their foot forward towards the Olympics. But Noah Lyles and Sha'Carri Richardson do not have the pull of like Tyreek Hill or Aaron Rodgers or the folks they kind of build these seasons around and bring you back into the lives of on a regular basis, right? We feel like we're closer to the athlete who's larger than life in a series like this. Now, the regularity of schedules and matchups of the NFL, with it being a singular league, is also something that benefits this, and track and field doesn't have that unless this is going to be something that the Diamond League produces. But even then, right, we talked about this before, not every big star is hitting all of these Diamond League races. And it does make it difficult to, week over week understand how these like best in class athletes are performing relative to each other, which is tough. And then again, this access to content for them to be able to turn this around in a week or less, there needs to be like a complete revamp of how the content system works with World Athletics, and or whatever entity is in control of the content. So an unfortunate, unlikely, but I think everybody who's familiar with Hard Knocks knows that it's a one-off. Now, the other two kind of genres of series or content that can be produced on an episodic level could be something that's like dramatized or something that's like reality. Now, just like two notes on this that come to mind for me is like, could there be a fictional series on track and field? It seems unlikely. Like we've seen Friday Night Lights, we've seen Ted Lasso, we've seen All American. Like these are popular shows that there's a good, it's just likely that people have seen this, that have come up in recent history. Like All American and Friday Night Lights are dramas, but they're centered around football. It's a well-known sport and a familiar sport within the U.S. It allows for an access point that can capture a wide range of fans, right? It's like, again, the familiarity with the sport and what goes on in the scope of said sport allows them to like loosely reference or really tightly reference the sport, and for people to not be lost in the process while still kind of understanding what goes on. And yeah, like they benefit from that access point in the way they built this out. Now, Ted Lasso had the difficulty in the American market of focusing on soccer, but they were able to succeed, likely from like boatloads of marketing spend from Apple as an original series, which this probably is not the greatest comparison because that is a platform that's looking to make this so big and so successful that they're putting all of their money behind making, this a success. So that's like bringing a gun to a knife fight in the scope of like building out a series in a fictional sense. Now, there are also referential shows like The League that focus on fantasy football, and Shoresy, which is a hockey-inspired spinoff from Letterkenny, both of which are about activities that orbit the sport. But I think these are good examples to show like how strong those particular sports are, where like The League, being fantasy football oriented, is predicated on this idea that everyone knows football, American football, so well that they can have a show based on the peripheral activity that fans engage in around that sport. Like that's just such a measure of reach, in my opinion. And same thing with Shoresy. Like obviously hockey isn't as big of a spectator sport as American football is in the US, but for them to very like loosely reference hockey, and it just shows like the strength of the sport. Yes, you can argue that both of those shows have a greater niche appeal than something like Ted Lasso or All American or, Friday Night Lights, but they're still predicated on knowledge of the sport that I don't think exists in track and field. And that's where these dramatized series don't necessarily feel like they are something that would be likely. Now, on the reality side of things, right, this also seems kind of unlikely as well, right? The shows that come to my mind that I remember seeing on like Spike TV or like Paramount Network is like Pros versus Joes and The Ultimate Fighter, right? These kind of game show-esque sports-laden shows, right? They're competition-based programs for a prize of some kind. More specifically, Pros versus Joes put regular people in competition across several sport disciplines against professional athletes, which is like ridiculous. I mean, it was just people would, have to get like tackled by like a Hall of Famer or like get in a boxing ring, or some of them were running base. But like, while I want to see someone get smoked by Sha'Carri in a 100 regularly, just to like help legitimize like how strong of an athlete she is, the competition is kind of one-dimensional. It's over quickly. It doesn't really have like the drama or like the shock value of somebody getting like physically hurt, which seemed like Pros versus Joes like was kind of baiting you as a viewer to be like, oh, they're going to get tackled by an NFL player. Are they going to be able to walk tomorrow? So that seems like a different thing that can't be replicated in track and field potentially. But The Ultimate Fighter, right? This seems like a great example of like high risk production with low reward potentially. This is a self-produced series from the UFC to bring in like amateur athletes and amateur fighters looking to break into this league, right? Each week is characterized by like the athletic growth and competition between fighters and like an elimination style bracket. It culminates to like a live event finale where the winner is crowned and given a contract. Now, to me, this illustrates like the necessity for a league to brand to like own the competition fully and support it properly, like the UFC tried to do here. But this is a huge investment of like time, resources, money to hopefully create a star. Now, I'm not even going to touch how different like a combat sport is in its like raw nature to track and field, right? They're very different. But even just looking at the investment that needs to be taken on to make this successful, like a weird secret about me is like one of my internships I did when I was in grad school was with the UFC, and seeing the way that they produced that show and what they had to put behind it. They had like several facilities and production teams that were solely dedicated to producing the series. And even then, like, I don't think it was a household name of a show. And the people, the stars that came out of it weren't necessarily like household names. They didn't become the next, big thing in the sport. So it is a huge gamble that like to invest in that over and over is super risky. So that also seems like an unlikely thing, again, unless there was like some benefactor that came out of left field to make this possible. But it's just fun to think about like what could work, right? What's the next iteration of track and field being developed for the viewer? Now, I want to hear some thoughts from everybody listening as well. Like, I'd love for you to write in about docuseries that you enjoy. And if there's potential, maybe something we've seen before, right? That's already been filmed or that's out there in the world. If there is that we could reference, or if there's some kind of format that we haven't even considered yet, that should be considered. I'd love to hear some thoughts on it, especially as like we get ready for these first episodes to come out in this Netflix docuseries due to release in the summer of 2024. So I appreciate everyone listening, coming along for the journey, and engaging in this kind of thought process with me, and would love to hear from you. So we'll check in. This next episode is going to be like an Ask Me Anything side of things. I want to hear some opinions from folks who listen and who have skepticisms or strong opinions, or just like are willing to kind of talk it out about their opinions surrounding this upcoming series. So look forward to that in the next few weeks. Thanks, everyone.